She fired me from my own family's company, then tried to steal everything we built. But what didn't she know? I still owned the ground beneath her empire. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's about turning quiet loyalty into unstoppable leverage. Brandon Kessler stood at the edge of the rooftop garden of the Westbrook Hotel, the cool ocean breeze brushing against his skin as he stared at the horizon. Waves crashed gently along the coast below, and the familiar scent of sea salt lingered in the air. It had always brought him peace, but today, the view felt different, tainted, distant. This place, his pride and joy, had become the center of a brewing storm that would change everything. He had built so much of his life around Skyreach Hotels, the family company. He'd started in the trenches, front desk, night shifts, housekeeping stints, shadowing maintenance crews, while Danielle, his younger sister, had taken a fast track straight from her Ivy League business degree into the executive wing. Their father, Richard Kessler, the founder and patriarch, had believed in proving oneself through grit. Brandon had taken that lesson to heart. It had been 15 years since he took on the role of vice president of operations, modernizing the brand, leading expansion, and most importantly, turning loss-making properties into award-winning successes. When Danielle rejoined Skyreach full-time after her MBA, it was expected she would complement Brandon's operational mastery with her strategic brilliance. For a time, it seemed like they were an unstoppable team. But over the past 2 years, something had shifted. Danielle had become colder, more distant, and increasingly controlling. She reshuffled leadership, implemented decisions without consulting Brandon, and questioned his authority publicly. Then, 2 months ago, she recommended his temporary leave of absence during a board meeting he wasn't invited to. By the time Brandon found out, his office was locked, his company email shut down, and his father, whose declining health had pulled him away from day-to-day affairs, offered only a cryptic response: "Just give it time, son." But time had revealed truths Brandon hadn't wanted to face. This wasn't a power struggle, it was an ambush. Patricia Sloan, his longtime friend and legal advisor, sat across from him in the hotel lounge, a file spread open between them. "I ran the corporate trace you asked for," she said, tapping on a page. "Kessler Vision LLC, registered 3 years ago. Multiple shell entities to obscure ownership, but the trail leads back to Danielle." Brandon stared at the printouts. "She created a company using our name. She's been pitching to investors under the radar, positioning Kessler Vision as a next-gen luxury brand that builds on Skyreach's success while redefining customer experience." Patricia's voice was grim. "And here's the kicker, she's actively targeting locations where Skyreach is strongest." Brandon's eyes narrowed. He took a long breath. "And she got me out of the way to do it. She needed to clear the path," Patricia confirmed. "And it worked. Investors are biting. There's talk of a major funding round." He clenched his jaw. "We built this together. Everything, our properties, our staff, our name. And now, she's selling it off in pieces to fuel her ambitions." "There's more," Patricia said, sliding over another page. "The leases. You still own the land beneath Westbrook, Burlington, and Portland. Those were personal purchases." Brandon murmured. "Dad thought I was crazy, but I believed in the long game. I wanted to protect our assets." Patricia leaned in. "Danielle's planning to propose selling those properties at the next board meeting. If the board approves, Skyreach will sell the buildings, while you will still own the land. That makes her your tenant." Brandon blinked slowly. "She's playing a longer con than I thought, unless you play smarter." The silence stretched between them. 2 days later, Brandon received a call from Vincent Ross, an old family friend and board member. "I've seen the lease renewal terms," Vincent said without introduction. "And I've heard things about Kessler Vision. Not just rumors," Brandon said. "I respected your father," Vincent said, voice heavy. "That's why I joined this board. Danielle told us you were stepping away voluntarily, that you were burned out." "Did she mention her plans?" "No. That's why I'm calling. The board meeting is scheduled for 2 p.m. She's going to pitch selling Westbrook, Burlington, and Portland. Says the lease renewals make them unprofitable." Brandon stood by his window, watching the light ripple on the water. "She wants to sell the buildings, then acquire them through her new venture at distressed prices." A pause. "You need to be ready, Brandon." "I am." Vincent hung up without saying more. Instead of attending the board meeting, Brandon flew to New York and met Julian Hayes, CEO of Commonwealth Hotels. Julian had once tried to recruit him years ago. At the time, Brandon had refused out of loyalty, but loyalty was a currency that Danielle had spent recklessly. "Skyreach is looking to offload properties," Julian said, sipping coffee in his sleek Central Park office. "And you happen to own the land beneath them." Brandon slid a folder across the table. "Commonwealth acquires the buildings. I lease the land to you at favorable terms. You get prime properties without the land acquisition cost. I retain ownership and the staff keep their jobs." Julian flipped through the documents. "Why not just raise the rent and force Skyreach to bleed out?" "Because Danielle is launching a competing brand. She'd let the properties rot." "I won't let that happen." Julian raised an eyebrow. "That's personal." "No, it's principled." Julian sat back, nodding. "We'll run the numbers." In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly. Julian's legal team drafted acquisition proposals. Brandon contacted trusted staff at the 3 properties, assuring them of stability. Word leaked. An industry blog posted a speculative article about Sky Reach's hidden financial crisis and Commonwealth's interest in their prime locations. Danielle responded with an L company email. There are no plans to sell any of our properties. Sky Reach remains strong and committed to growth. Hours later, Brandon's father called. The board rejected Danielle's proposal, he said, voice subdued. She's furious. Said you're sabotaging us. I'm protecting what we built. She found out about Commonwealth. Brandon didn't reply. What are you trying to accomplish? His father asked. Brandon closed his eyes. What you always taught me, to protect the foundation, even if that means rebuilding from the ground up. 3 weeks later, Sky Reach's quarterly report showed declining revenues. The stock dipped 12%. The board, minus Danielle, reached out to Brandon. They wanted to discuss strategic alternatives. He walked into the boardroom the first time since being ousted. Danielle sat at the head of the table, cool and combative. Their father sat beside her, older and worn. Brandon took his seat at the opposite end. Calm, ready. Danielle opened. Let's be clear, my brother is attempting a hostile takeover. Brandon responded, measured, incorrect. I'm exercising property rights. Commonwealth is offering market value and job guarantees. Sky Reach has options, but none include deception. He passed folders to each board member. Danielle developed a competing brand while leading Sky Reach. She hid it from the board. She planned to devalue and repurchase our assets through a new shell company. Stunned silence. Their father stared at Danielle. Is this true? She hesitated too long. Brandon continued. Commonwealth's proposal retains every employee and honors all existing commitments. Kessler Vision wouldn't. You planned this. Danielle hissed. You waited. No, I hoped I'd never have to. The board voted. Unanimous approval to sell the properties. 1 abstention. Richard Kessler. Danielle walked out without speaking. Vincent approached. The board will ask for her resignation tomorrow. We need interim leadership. Brandon shook his head. Not me. I've made other plans. That night, Brandon stood again on the rooftop of the Westbrook, soon to be the harbor view under the Commonwealth's Northeast Collection. The foundation beneath the building, the land still belonged to him. He wasn't done fighting, but for now, he'd won a battle that mattered, and this was only the beginning. Danielle's dismissal of Brandon from Sky Reach reverberated across the upper corridors of the hospitality world, like a muffled explosion. Brandon Kessler had been a rising star, respected, composed, and creative. To those who'd worked alongside him, the firing didn't make sense. But Brandon kept his silence, letting Danielle claim center stage with her brittle PR campaign about fresh direction and leadership evolution. But within Brandon, silence was never still. It festered. The first real tremor came when Patricia, Brandon's longtime legal and strategic advisor, completed her deep dive into a mysterious LLC. Brandon had mentioned the name with the casual venom of someone too tired to be furious anymore. Kessler Vision, he had said flatly. Look into it. What Patricia found wasn't simply a shell company. It was a blueprint, a full-fledged hospitality brand in development for nearly 3 years. Danielle's name wasn't explicitly tied to its founding documents, but the connections were undeniable. The registered agent had ties to her husband. Several of the investors were old business school acquaintances, and the flagship concept bore more than a passing resemblance to the properties Brandon had developed during his final years at Sky Reach. The pieces snapped together with brutal clarity. Danielle hadn't fired Brandon because he was a threat to the company. She fired him because he was a threat to her plan to replace the company. When the emergency board meeting was announced, Brandon didn't plan to attend. Instead, he made a call to Julian Hayes, CEO of Commonwealth Hotels, an old rival, occasional collaborator, and the only man Brandon trusted to understand both the business and the betrayal. Sky Reach might be liquidating some key properties, Brandon said as he stood in the middle of his apartment, gazing at a wall of blueprints. Interested. There was a pause. Then Julian said, "You're not calling as an executive, are you? You're calling as a landowner." Exactly. By the time the board met, Brandon was already on a flight to New York. When he landed, his inbox had exploded. Patricia's documents had made their way into the hands of Vincent Rosser, board member, Danielle's classmate from Wharton, and one of the few people Brandon still thought of as principal. Vincent left him a message. "I've seen the leases. I've also seen what she's planning. I'm not saying anything out loud, but you should be in New York, not that meeting room." Brandon met Julian in a penthouse office overlooking Central Park. The contrast between the space and the muted, utilitarian offices Danielle had always allocated him at Sky Reach wasn't lost on him. "We take the buildings. You keep the land," Julian said slowly, flipping through the proposal. "Lease terms are competitive. Staff stays. You consult. We get market entry. You get security. And Danielle gets a wall she can't climb over," Brandon said. Julian's expression didn't change, but his eyes glinted. Poetic. Over the next week, the plan evolved with surgical precision. Patricia worked through legal options, while Julian's acquisitions team prepared offers. Brandon meanwhile made discreet contact with the general managers at the Westbrook, Burlington, and Portland hotels. Miguel, his old friend and maintenance chief, was the first to respond. "Whatever you're doing, just don't let her shut this place down. People have kids, mortgages." "I won't," Brandon promised, "but I need your discretion." News of the acquisition plan leaked. A prominent blog hinted that Commonwealth might be expanding by acquiring distressed Skyreach assets. Danielle panicked. Her response came in the form of a company-wide email: "Skyreach is not selling any properties. Our position remains strong. Rumors are just that rumors. But the damage was done." Later that day, Brandon's father called. "She says you're trying to hurt the company," he said, voice strained. "She already hurt it," Brandon replied. "I'm protecting what's left." There was a long silence. The board didn't approve her motion. "The properties aren't being sold." "Then there's hope," his father sighed. "She's not the enemy you think. Then you haven't been paying attention." 3 weeks later, Skyreach released its quarterly report. Revenue was down, costs up, and investor confidence slipping. That same day, Brandon received a formal request to meet with the board. Danielle wasn't invited. Strategic alternatives. The email said. Brandon walked into Skyreach headquarters with a calm expression and a storm in his chest. The boardroom looked unchanged: glass walls, minimalist furniture, and the scent of fresh flowers Danielle insisted on every week. She sat at the head of the table. Their father was beside her. The board arrayed like a jury. Brandon took a seat at the far end. "My brother is staging a hostile takeover," Danielle began, her voice taut. "Incorrect," Brandon said, sliding folders across the table. "This is not a takeover, it's a reckoning." Each folder contained the same evidence Patricia had compiled: business registrations, timelines, email threads, and Danielle's business plan for Kessler Vashuna, luxury hospitality brand aimed at poaching markets. His father read in stunned silence. Vincent closed his folder and looked at Danielle. "Did you lie to this board?" Danielle's face was a portrait of fury and disbelief. It was a consultancy, a vision not real yet. "Permits were filed," Brandon said. "Designs submitted. Investors lined up. That makes it real." Julian's acquisition proposal followed. Commonwealth offered top market value, job security, and operational continuity. The vote passed unanimously. Their father abstained. Danielle stormed out. Afterward, Vincent approached Brandon quietly. "We're asking for her resignation tomorrow. We need someone to lead." "Not me," Brandon said. "I'm done fighting." A year later, the Westbrook Hotel had a new name, the Harborview, but its soul remained intact. Miguel still ran maintenance. The staff still smiled with purpose. Julian handed Brandon a quarterly report on the rooftop terrace. "Revenue up 17%. Your instincts were good." Brandon smiled faintly. "No more suits, no boardroom wars, just consulting, mentoring, and restoring what had been nearly destroyed." "Senior father?" Julian asked. "Monthly dinners. He's healing." And Danielle filed for bankruptcy. Kessler Vision didn't survive. They stood in silence watching the harbor. Eventually, Julian left. Brandon's phone buzzed. "Dinner tonight. Bringing the grandkids." Brandon typed back a quick reply. He looked out over the property, not just at the building, but the land, the foundation he'd safeguarded. Danielle never understood. Titles fade, but foundations endure. He turned and headed downstairs. Time for dinner, the kind that mattered. The air in Boston carried the last crispness of winter, slicing against my face as I stepped out of Logan Airport. Despite the cold, I felt a quiet warmth stirring in my chest. Anticipation. Things were moving, slowly, deliberately, the way I liked it. After my re-emergence into the hospitality world through Commonwealth Hotels, I wasn't back to reclaim titles. I was back to reclaim my legacy and my terms. The Harborview, formerly Skyreach's Westbrook Hotel, was outperforming even our most optimistic projections. But beyond the numbers, it symbolized something Danielle had never understood. Hospitality wasn't about marble floors or Instagrammable lobbies. It was about trust, relationships, roots. As I rode to the hotel in a black car arranged by Commonwealth's local team, my phone buzzed. Julian Hayes, CEO and now close confidant, had texted, "Lunch pushed to 2. Be ready, investor from Dubai wants to meet." That wasn't surprising. After our strategic acquisition of Skyreach's crown jewels, the industry had taken notice. We were no longer just recovering from Danielle's betrayal. We were building momentum. And with Julian's plans to expand the Commonwealth Northeast collection internationally, the stakes had grown exponentially. I arrived at the Harborview to find Miguel waiting in the lobby, smiling. "Mr. Kessler, or do I call you director now?" I smiled, grasping his shoulder. "Just Brandon, always." Miguel led me to my preferred corner office on the 7th floor, not a CEO's desk, but a quiet room with skyline views, where I could work in peace, free from the politics that once drowned me. "I've already prepared the renovation proposals," he said, handing over a slim black folder. "The team's excited, especially after they saw how you handled Danielle." "I didn't handle her," I said carefully. "I let the truth do the work." He nodded solemnly. "And truth, I learned was an unstoppable force when revealed at the right moment. By 2 p.m. Julian had arrived, tall, immaculate, and energetic as ever. He entered the boardroom with the swagger of a man used to winning. "Brandon," he said, grasping my hand. "You've been busy, keeping things grounded," I said. Julian smirked. "Well, I need you to fly now. Meet Rami Darwish." A sharply dressed man in his late 30s entered, his handshake firm, gaze piercing. "I've heard much about you, Mr. Kessler," he said. "Mostly from competitors who are bitter." I chuckled. "Bitterness is a byproduct of miscalculated ambition." He grinned. "Well said. Let's talk numbers." We sat. Over the next 90 minutes, Rami laid out the bones of a potential $250 million joint venture to introduce Commonwealth properties into the Middle East and North Africa using Harborview and the Burlington property as flagship benchmarks. "Dubai, Doha, Muscat," he said. "But this time, built on your model, not the Skyreach one." Understated elegance. Relationship-first branding, loyalty-driven operations. Julian glanced at me. "What do you think?" I sat back, mind ticking. "International expansion isn't about replication," I said. "It's about translation. If we can adapt our DNA to their culture without diluting either, we've got something." Rami's eyes twinkled. "Exactly why I pushed to meet you." We agreed to spend the next month exploring feasibility, starting with teams traveling both ways. It felt good, organic, forward-moving, strategic, clean, something Danielle's world had never been. That night, I dined alone. A small trattoria tucked into a corner street in the North End. The waitress recognized me from the harbor view. "We've had lots of guests staying there lately. Business travelers. Some even said they were scouting for properties." I sipped my wine. Really, anyone mention who they were with? Not sure, but one of them said something like Vision Quest, Vision Vantage. My fork froze midair. Kessler Vision. It was back, or at least Danielle was trying to resurrect it again 2 days later. Patricia, my long-trusted legal consultant and former Skyreach insider, confirmed the news. Danielle secured funding through a group of private equity backers, mostly off the books. She's rebranding Kessler Vision under a new Shalmeriton Group. Is she buying land or leasing? Neither yet, but she's reaching out to some of your former vendors and trying to undercut your supply chains. Of course. Classic Danielle. "Do any of those vendors have NDAs or exclusivity clauses with the Commonwealth?" Patricia smirked. "Several, and I've already drafted breach notices should you want to enforce them." "No," I said after a pause. "Not yet. Let her try. Let's see what kind of monster she builds when no one's feeding it but her." A week later, I received an invitation. Not from Danielle, from my father. A gala celebrating 50 years of Skyreach hospitality. The irony wasn't lost on me. Skyreach, now a fractured company struggling to maintain its relevance, was clinging to nostalgia. Still, I decided to go, not for the company, for closure. The event was held in Manhattan, in the Skyreach Grand, one of the last remaining properties under family control. The room shimmered with glass, gold, and too much memory. My father looked tired but proud, delivering a speech that bordered on delusional, painting Skyreach as a phoenix poised to rise again. Danielle wasn't on stage, but she was there, at a corner table, flanked by men I didn't recognize, investors, sharks, and ex-believers. I caught her eye. She stared back, no smirk, no challenge, just a calculation. Just a calculation. As I turned away, my father approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd invite me." He gave a sad smile. "I thought age might bring clarity, but it just brought regrets." I nodded. "We all have them. I see the news. Harborview, Burlington, Portland. You've done well. Because I chose people over ego, maybe," he said. "Maybe that's why you won." I shook his hand. There were no apologies. None needed. Not anymore. The following Monday, I was back at work when Julian walked in. "Got a call from the Wall Street Journal," he said. "Danielle's venture is under SEC review." One of her backers flipped. I sighed, let it burn itself down. He raised an eyebrow. "You really don't want to take the final shot?" "I already did," I said, "the day we stopped playing her game and started building something better." Julian smiled. "You know," he said, "I think this whole journey, it wasn't revenge. Not really. What was it?" He tapped the folder labeled Northeast Expansion Phase 2, Redemption. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. SEC launches formal investigation into Meriton Group for securities fraud and disclosure violations. Danielle's face, tight-lipped, professionally groomed, appeared beside the headline. Beneath it, the subheading read, "Sources confirm internal whistleblower exposed discrepancies in investor communications and falsified property acquisition claims." I sat in my office at the Harbor View, staring at the screen. I felt nothing, no surge of victory, no celebratory grin, only the slow breath of inevitability. She had always built houses out of mirrors, beautiful reflections, no foundations, they were bound to shatter. But what followed surprised even me. That evening, as the sky turned gold over Boston Harbor, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, Patricia messaged me. "Danielle's lawyer reached out. She wants to meet." "No lawyers, just you and her." I chose the place neutral, old world, and private, a mahogany-paneled club downtown. No cameras, no press. A fireplace flickered quietly in the corner. When Danielle walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered, still dressed like power and navy pantsuit. Sharp heels, but her eyes were fraying around the edges. We sat in silence for nearly a minute before she spoke. Everything's gone. I said nothing. The investors, the money, the properties that were never really mine. Her voice faltered. Do you know what it's like to wake up and realize you were the villain? You didn't just wake up, I said quietly. You've been pressing snooze for years. A bitter chuckle. I used to tell myself I was saving the company, that Dad had made it weak, that you were too soft. You weren't trying to save anything, I replied. You were trying to win, against your own blood. She met my gaze for the first time. And you built this revenge story like a religion. I didn't seek revenge, I said. I enforced consequences. There's a difference. Another long silence. Then, finally, she asked, what happens to me now? I leaned back. That depends on you. You can keep spinning, scrambling for another identity. Or you can stop, face it, own it, start over. I don't have anything left. You have 2 children who deserve better than your version of ambition. Start there. Danielle swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on her glass. She left without another word, and I didn't look back. 3 months later, Danielle entered a plea agreement. No prison time, but a 5-year business ban and full cooperation with federal regulators. To avoid further action, she moved to Vermont with her kids, changed her last name back to Caldwell. Our mother's maiden name went silent. Spyrich, now leaderless and diluted, sold off 2 more properties. Julian acquired one. The other went to a Japanese firm. My father and I had dinner every second Sunday. He'd grown thinner but lighter, free of the crushing responsibility that had weighed on him for decades. You did the right thing, he said one evening over rosemary chicken, even if I didn't always see it. I wasn't always right, I admitted, but I was steady. He smiled. Your mother used to say you were the only Kessler who knew how to listen. You'd sit at the dinner table at 7 years old, asking questions like a therapist. I smiled too. I guess I was always watching the foundation. In July, Julian summoned me to New York. A hotel project in Zurich had stalled after a key investor backed out. He needed someone to travel, negotiate, and ensure the acquisition didn't fall apart. It wasn't a glamorous role, but it was essential. You built this branch of the Commonwealth, he said. You know how to guide it better than anyone. I agreed, but only under one condition. I want to select and mentor the next regional lead, and then step away from day-to-day ops. Julian blinked, retiring, refocusing. I don't want a title. I want peace. He agreed. And so I flew to Zurich, where I spent the summer navigating bureaucratic mazes, training a young executive named Clara Spencer and watching the quiet snow fall over the Alps at night. By September, the Zurich property was secured, staff hired, and Clara was ready to take over. Back in Boston, I walked the grounds of the Harbor View. Miguel met me in the garden courtyard. We've got another wedding next weekend, he said. Same couple that got engaged here 2 years ago. That's what we built it for, I said. Not headlines. Stories. He nodded. You staying long? I looked at him. No, just long enough to say goodbye. A month later, a handwritten envelope arrived. Danielle. Inside, a short note. Brandon, I'm working part-time at a non-profit that helps single mothers re-enter the workforce. I file paperwork, answer phones. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. The foundation matters. You were right, Danielle. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into a drawer next to my mother's old recipe cards. I bought a small cottage on the coast, nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, a fireplace, and a short walk to the sea. No staff, no assistants, just me. Some evenings I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. Other nights, I called my father and asked about old recipes we'd forgotten. I wasn't chasing legacy anymore, because the real legacy had already been written in the teams I mentored, the hotels I saved, the employees who still had jobs, and the family I refused to lose to pride. Revenge was never the destination. It was just the road I had to take to find my way back home.